10 years ago, I traveled to Guyana as part of a field research trip with my high school. This was my first time traveling outside of North America, and was an eye-opening experience. I've never forgotten the 2 weeks I spent hiking the jungle to find bugs, fishing to collect parasite samples, climbing mountains and driving through deserts. The natural environment of the country felt like it was from a storybook. I had never imagined a place so beautiful and bursting with life, and I will forever be grateful for my experience there. While the purpose of the trip was to catalog plants and animals in collaboration with university students, I was most fascinated by the people we met. We spoke to people in the city and to those living in the Sarama village in the hinterlands. Their way of life so varied from place to place, yet always starkly different to my own experiences. Guyana is a place with lush tropical rainforests, a beautiful coastline, and a rich cultural history. It is also a politically complex country. Imperial forces have long been interested in the highly productive environment Guyana boasts, and have long been exploiting it and its people. Before I tell you about Andaiye and the work she did over her lifetime, I want to set the stage so you can understand the forces she was up against. Georgetown is Guyana's capital, and due to its coastal location, has been at the center of political conflict for hundreds of years. Colonizers, from all the expected countries, appeared in the 1400s, waging a genocide on the indigenous peoples. Later, in the 1800s, the British started bringing enslaved African people, forming the world's most prosperous sugar colony. As slavery became taboo, the British decided to rebrand. Introducing indentured servitude, all the degradation of slavery with none of the yucky, guilty feelings for the poor white colonizers. They also switched up their ethnic preference, bringing a massive number of indentured Indian people to the country. By 1917, when indentured servitude was abolished, there were two main ethnic groups in the country: the Indo-Guyanese people and the Afro-Guyanese people. United, these two groups potentially could have usurped the colonial powers which racialized and harmed them. This, unfortunately, was not the Brits' first rodeo. In an effort to sow distrust, the Indo-Guyanese people were encouraged by their oppressors to practice their culture, while the Afro-Guyanese people had their culture stripped from them. The racial divide in Guyana became stark as the two groups lost trust in one another. Enter Andaiye. Born to two nurses in Georgetown on September 11th, 1942, was a healthy baby girl. Growing up, she would bear witness to political unrest. Guyana's government in the 1950s was made up of two socialist parties, overseen by the colonial power across the pond. Militarized coups and racially charged elections informed the way Andaiye moved through the world. She states that, from childhood, she could feel, if not understand, the interaction that race, ethnicity, color, class, nation, gender, and age had on her life. She entered the political world in a search for explanations of how power worked, and of how each power relation worked in interaction with others. Andaiye attended the University College of the West Indies in Jamaica during the 60s to study French and Spanish. Upon her return to Guyana, she joined organizations such as the New World Group and the Movement Against Oppression, and began teaching at the Charlestown Government Secondary School. In the early 70s, she dropped the colonial name given to her at birth and became Andaiye, a Swahili name meaning "a daughter comes home." Alyssa Trotz, a longtime family friend and colleague, shared that by dropping her last name, Andaiye was attempting to display her contempt with the patriarchal colonial naming standard, and by adopting a Swahili name, she further linked herself to the African diaspora. Around this same time, she was removed from her teaching role due to her activism. Feeling a need for change, Andaiye moved to New York City to teach at the City University of New York, Queens College. In the U.S., she became intertwined with the Black Power movement and learned a great deal from prominent Marxists in her community. Upon her return to Guyana in 1978, Andaiye joined the Working People's Alliance. Moving up through the ranks, Andaiye was able to help mount opposition against the dictatorial rule of the People's National Congress. As Andaiye learned more and more about the political corruption surrounding her, she realized that there was a need for post-political activism. Knowing that governments come and go, she and 6 other women formed the Red Thread, a group which operated separately from any political party. The Red Thread was originally founded as a way to bring income to women of all ethnic and class backgrounds. The group taught highly valued skills to women in remote communities, making them more employable and aiding their financial freedom. Andaiye points out that there is a need for women to organize autonomously from men because they have different levels of power, while also acknowledging that the members of the Red Thread also held different levels of power among their different sectors. In reflection of her own activism, Andaiye clarified that the Red Thread studiously ignored the power relations among women, thereby allowing women with more power, however derived, to dominate or exclude, consciously or not. Throughout her life, we can see Andaiye's ideology shift towards transnational feminism. Retrospectively, she posits that if we work to end the power relations between men and women while ignoring the power relations among women, we will not succeed in transforming the power relations between men and women, because we are not aiming at the whole power structure, of which the power relations between men and women are only a part. In the 90s, Andaiye joined global campaigns to better the experiences of all women. She helped bring the global women's strike to Guyana and created metrics to value the unpaid labor of women in the global south, which are still being used currently. Around the same time, the Red Thread changed course, advocating against gendered violence and fighting for women's reproductive health rights. Andaiye is a published, peer-reviewed author. She has spoken globally in political and apolitical settings for the betterment of women's rights globally. Her vision of liberation as unity among people exemplifies the transnational approach of dismantling a multitude of power structures. Andaiye battled cancer for many years of her life and wrote about the medical system as an oppressive power. She said, for the great majority of cancer patients, a central part of the work of surviving is holding your own against the power of a medical system and culture which at best underestimate and at worst take advantage of your relative powerlessness. She felt that a doctor's power derives from our acceptance that they possess the knowledge that will determine our fate. And this is all the more true when their approach to medicine is purely as science, not also as art. Andaiye understood the futility of her fight against her own body and wrote throughout her illness about her experiences. She died May 31st of 2019, almost immediately following the completion of her book, The Point is to Change the World. The book is an anthology of her writings throughout her 50 years of activism and greatly informed my understanding of her life. Andaiye's voice is clear, her writings are very matter-of-fact, and her wit and sense of humor is evident. Dr. Alyssa Trotz edited and published Andaiye's book posthumously and spoke about her in a podcast called Cite Black Women. When asked about sexuality, Trotz clarifies that while Andaiye would not have used the language of queer to define herself, Andaiye has a queer ethic. Her disobedience to what it meant to be growing up as a respectable middle-class woman, particularly in relation to the grassroots women that she lived with and worked with, defined her queerness. We know that Andaiye's life experiences greatly informed her activism. Understanding her political ideology, why might she have not identified with a queer label? Do you think we can use a label of queerness for Andaiye retroactively? In an open letter to young people, Andaiye wrote, "You have to try to walk across the divisions between you and join yourselves together to become the power that you can be. Only then can you work out your demands as young people and make them happen." In 2024, how does unity among young people with diverse power networks help further Andaiye's work? While I have barely scratched the surface of her life and activism, I think it is obvious that Andaiye pushed forward many movements, and even after her death, we can still learn from her hard, and often unpaid, work.